Eu achei que ele não precisava do microfone, mas precisa por causa da transmissão. Bom dia, bom dia. Vamos começar a programação de hoje. Eu tenho que ir para a área que eu apareço. É Get Instructions, I don't follow. Bom dia, vamos começar então a nossa programação hoje. A gente vai ter uma mudança aqui na nossa programação. Primeiro vem agora a professora Janine Coates, com a palestra Qualitative Research in Physical Education. Thank you, Janine. Eu espero que a gente tenha um ótimo dia hoje. Janine, it's yours.
Bom dia. Em português. Can you hear me okay now? Awesome. Awesome. This will work better for my interview. Better sound. I'm really excited to be here in Brazil, and I'm really excited to meet you all and to be able to speak with you today. Today's session, so mine and Dr. Lesley Sharpe's, who's following me today, are a bit more practical in nature. So we're going to ask you to do some things, because I don't like just standing at the front of a room and speaking. Malu, how do I make it move? I worked it out. It's fine. So I thought I'd start with a bit of an introduction about who I am. So as you know, I'm Janine Coates. I work at Loughborough University, which is that little pin in the map in England. So we're kind of pretty smack bang in the Midlands of England. We have a beautiful, beautiful campus. As you can see by this picture here, we have wonderful sports facilities, a lot of green space. We're surrounded by woodlands. It's a really, really wonderful space to work. But I don't live in Loughborough. I'm a bit more of a city girl. Loughborough is quite remote in many ways. So I actually live in Nottingham, which is why I have a picture of Robin Hood. So if you've seen the Disney film or the movie Robin Hood and Men in Tights, that's where he comes from, the city that I live in. And in fact, the major oak, so the tree that Robin Hood sort of worked from and lived in with all of his merry men, is still standing. It's a very, very old tree, thousands of years old. It is supported by platforms now, but it's a wonderful place to visit. So in terms of the work that I do, the majority of my work relates to physical education, physical activity, and sport for disabled young people, as with my wonderful, esteemed colleagues here. But I also do a range of other research. I do a lot of work with vulnerable young people. So in recent years, I've done quite a lot of work with homeless young people. And I also have a real interest in children who are in the early years of life, so 0 to 5, with a big focus on active play and outdoor learning. So I'm quite interdisciplinary in the work that I do. I work with lots of different communities, different populations, but my primary focus is work with children and young people with disabilities in a physical education or physical activity context. So I wanted to get to know a little bit more about you. I have a Padlet, which you can scan by the QR code. And I just want to know a little bit more about the kind of research you do, the populations that you work with, and any challenges that you may have faced in the research that you have done to date. And whilst you're doing that, I'm going to try and find the correct set of slides because I've realized that these aren't the right slides. Has everybody managed to get onto the Padlet before I take these slides down and put the correct slides up? Awesome. I'm just going to double check. We've got the right slides now. That was a really, really good start. Has everybody had a moment to have a think about the research that they do, challenges that they face? Please do feel welcome to sort of share with those around you. Later on in the session, I'm going to ask you to work in small groups. So it's good to get familiar with those you're sitting next to, maybe make some new friends, have a chat about the work that you're doing, the challenges that you face. And we're going to come back to this later on in today's session. So to give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about today, I wanted to foreground this with the ask from Malou. So when Malou asked me to speak about qualitative research, she was like, qualitative research, and that's massive. I could spend hours, if not days, talking about all of the ins and outs of what qualitative research is and why it's valuable for us as researchers of disability within a physical education or sport or physical activity context. And I don't have that much time. There's so much to talk about that so Justin, Anthony and I, we edited a book about qualitative methods for researching disability within physical education context, which is coming out in January, I believe. So in trying to think about what I could and what I wanted to cover today and what I thought might be most useful to share with you, I decided that I would cover these three facets. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what qualitative research is and why I think we need it. I'm going to talk about some of the problems that I think exist when using traditional methods for doing research, particularly with disabled communities. And then I'm going to end by talking about the approach to research that I use most frequently and that I think really captures the experiences and the agency of disabled people within research, and that's participatory research methods. As I said before, I am going to ask you to do some things, so hopefully you feel quite comfortable talking with each other, maybe doing some drawing and some activities. I'm very mindful that we don't have a lot of table space, and I do have some big paper. So if you are comfortable, please feel welcome to work on the floor. We have some pens and so on for you as well, and I have a lovely group of helpers. So what is qualitative research and why do we need it? Defining qualitative research on one hand is very, very easy, and on the other hand is very, very complex. Essentially, qualitative research is an umbrella term for a really wide range of approaches to doing research that use, analyze, explore, interpret unstructured and non-numerical data. Quite often when we think about qualitative research, our mind is taken to interviews and focus groups. Those are two of the key methods that qualitative researchers will gravitate to. And they're very valuable approaches to use. Qualitative research from the perspective of what myself and some of my colleagues do is very much about understanding lived experience. It's about understanding the social context in which people experience the world, their interpretations of it, their understandings of it, the issues that they may face, their feelings, their behaviors. What we're trying to do as qualitative researchers is to capture all of that complexity. So I wanted to present you with a different way of thinking about research, and this is a more positivist way of thinking about research: statistics. Lots of people gravitate towards statistics because they're very useful for situating an issue or a problem. A lot of the work that I do at the moment is with people who influence policy, and policymakers love statistics. They love them. Their go-to is put out a survey, let's get some statistics, and we'll put some nice graphs in a report to situate a problem. And this is a good example of that approach. So in the United Kingdom, in England, last year, Paralympics GB, they put out a really valuable sort of policy report called Equal Play, which was about disabled children and young people's experiences of physical education and school sport. And one of the key statistics that they use to situate that sort of policy document, that really influential document, is that only 25% of disabled children take part in sporting activity all of the time at school, compared to 41% of non-disabled children. You can see, you can plot that on a nice little graph. I've got a pie chart there. It situates an issue. It tells us that there's a problem that may need some kind of solution, but it doesn't give us the whole picture. And so we have to ask ourselves, what do the numbers not tell us? What's missing from that picture that we still don't know? So research based in statistics and quantitative, numerics, they tell us the scale of the issue. They tell us that, there is a problem there that maybe needs some form of solution and some better understanding. But they don't tell us why only a quarter of disabled young people are taking part in physical activity and sport in school. They don't tell us how it feels for those disabled young people. What are they feeling when they are or are not engaged in these activities at school compared to their non-disabled peers? And it doesn't tell us anything about the complexity of their lived experience. It's a snapshot that captures a very, very small aspect of disabled people's lives, but it doesn't give us any of the color or the complexity, or for me, the interesting parts of their experience that we really need to better understand if we want to create change. And we as researchers, that's our intention. The work that we do is intended to have some kind of impact and create some kind of change. And in my view, statistics alone don't do that. We also need to think about issues like intersectionality. I've got some nice images here. So we've got intersectionality as a really complex maze. It's layered. People's identities aren't binary, male, female, disabled, non-disabled. We don't live in binaries. We live very, very complex lives with very complex identities that shift and change. And statistics alone, even if you collect all the demographic information you can, don't tell us anything about that complexity. They don't tell us about the layered identities that people might have, about those layered oppressive experiences that they may have as, for example, a Black disabled woman. And we need to understand that, and we can't capture that sometimes through traditional methods. In social sciences, in particular, and in fact in a lot of other disciplines, medical sciences, environmental sciences, there's a growing recognition of the contextual nature of social experiences. There's a growing recognition that we need a more nuanced approach to understanding human life. And qualitative research gives us that approach. I can give a nice example of this. I was recently contacted by a cardiologist who works at Oxford University, who's really interested in exercise limitation amongst people who have heart failure. And we got on a call together, and he was like, I'm really, really good at tracking oxygen modules from the mouth through to the mitochondria, but I have no idea about the actual experiences of these people who have heart failure and why they might or might not exercise, and so I need your help. So there's a growing recognition that we have to understand lived experience if we want to create change. We also have to recognize the importance of space and place. So this was talked about quite a lot yesterday. Sebastian talked about it. Fabian talked about it, of understanding context. Context is very important. Experience is not universal. How a person feels in one context will change in a different context. We have to recognize culture and tradition and the place that has in shaping experiences. And that's very difficult to capture. And we have to work quite hard as researchers to recognize those complex ways in which people live and understand their lives and the spaces and places around them. And there's increasing value of lived experiences in giving rich detail. But there are challenges. How do we best tackle all of these issues? How do we best understand the authentic, true, lived experiences of disabled people through the research that we do? So one of the key problems for me, I think, with traditional approaches to research is that they don't necessarily capture that complexity effectively. And quite often traditional approaches to research have underlying sort of ableist energy. They're created by non-disabled people to collect data about non-disabled people, and they're just applied willy-nilly to disabled individuals, as if they're going to capture that complexity that I've just talked about. And that often doesn't happen. There's an author called Caroline Criado Perez. She talks a lot about, she's a feminist writer. She talks a lot about how women are represented in data, and how often, particularly from like a health-related perspective, the healthcare that women receive is not fit for purpose because it's been designed based on studies with men, particularly white men, and so it doesn't actually capture the experiences of women. And I think so she calls this an absent presence. There's lots of data about women, but it doesn't necessarily actually capture the experiences of women. And I think you can apply that same principle to disabled people. We have lots of data about disabled people, but does it really tell us anything about what it's like to be disabled? So there's an absent presence. We have data, but it doesn't really tell us what we need to know. It doesn't really capture that authentic experience. It doesn't show us what it means to be disabled within a very ableist society. And we can understand this through a sort of epistemological approach called epistemic injustice. So epistemic injustice is about how injustice is created through knowledge production. So the way that we as researchers collect, disseminate, understand, interpret our data creates forms of injustice. This approach was put forward by a philosopher called Miranda Fricker in 2007, and she has identified two key forms of epistemic injustice that we can see in research. The first is testimonial injustice, and this relates to who creates and contributes to knowledge production. She argues that in research, particularly research with marginalized or vulnerable groups, we're asking the wrong people. We're giving credibility to the wrong people for knowledge production. So a good example of this is if you look at the sort of inclusive P literature, the adapted physical education literature, there is a lot of literature about teachers' perspectives. What do teachers think about inclusion? And this is formed on the basis of a belief that disabled young people cannot contribute to research, that they don't have the credibility to share what it means to be inclusive. And so we ask teachers, or we ask non-disabled friends what they think about inclusion, or we talk to parents instead of going directly to the child. And this creates testimonial injustice. It means that we're not capturing the experiences of those with the lived experience. We're asking for secondhand information from people who don't have that experience. And that's really, really problematic. The other form of epistemic injustice that Fricke talks about is hermeneutical injustice. So hermeneutical injustice is about how knowledge is created. If we as researchers are using research tools that are not fit for purpose, that aren't really capturing the complex identities and lives of disabled people, then we are creating injustice. So we need to make sure that when we do research, we're using tools that actually have some meaning for disabled people, that they're able to contribute in a way that matters to them, that allows them to communicate and share their experiences in a way that is true to them. And quite often when we use traditional approaches to research, we don't do that. So I'm going to stop for our first activity. I'm going to get you to do some drawing. Can I have my lovely helpers? We've got some paper and pens. I'll explain the activity whilst my helpers are doing their helping. What I would like you to do is to draw a picture of a researcher. It can be yourself, it can be somebody else, it can be a made-up person, but I want you to draw a picture of a researcher, and on that picture, I want you to label it with the skills or the qualifications or the characteristics that you think make that person a researcher. So what qualifications do they need? What specific skills might they need? You know, are there particular characteristics that make somebody a researcher? And I'll give you, once you have your resources, maybe 5 or so minutes to do that, and please do feel welcome to work with those around you. It's up to you. If you want to work individually, please feel welcome to do that. If you prefer to work in groups, then you can do that. Do feel welcome to move to the floor if there isn't a lot of room. Please do, yeah. Join some groups. Yeah. Go on, Justin. I'm going to give you maybe 2 more minutes to finish your drawing of your researchers. 2 more. Yeah. So, like, for my master's cohort, there's 2 people, but they're not all my students. So I teach 80 of them. 80. Yeah, but it's a taught program, so they do a research project at the end of it, and I have I supervise maybe 1 student for that, but that's like 3 months of research. But the rest of it is all a taught program, so they attend lectures and do assessments and assignments like you would at undergraduate level. Yeah.
No, here they spend 2 years.
Oh, really?
So it's the beginning of their research.
Yeah.
So they spend and they attend national
Yeah.
classes.
So that's similar to South Africa, but the UK is very, very different.
And master students, they are very important.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
spend 2 years with me.
Yeah.
Going to an event and doing the research 2 years.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So our master students, a lot of them, it's just like a higher qualification. A lot of ours go on to become sport and exercise psychologists, so they work within sports teams doing like the psychological work. And a very, very small proportion will come on to do PhD. So one of my old master students is now my PhD student, but that's only a really small number of them that go on to do that.
They have to.
So most of my PhD students are funded at the moment through various different sources, but I do have a couple who are self-funding, so they pay for their own studies. But, yeah.
The chance to be a participant. But it's a beginning for us. It's like a beginner, the first step to be researching.
Okay. So I'm going to pause you on your researches. We're going to pause on your researches and we're going to move on to your next drawing activity. So you might want to flip your pieces of paper over so you've got a new sheet. So now I want you to do the same thing again. You're going to draw a person, but this time instead of it being a researcher, I want you to draw a research participant. And I want you to do the same thing. So you're going to think about the qualifications, the skills, the characteristics that make somebody a research participant. Okay, so you've got 2 more minutes to finish off your research participants. Okay, I'm going to pause you there, and I'm going to see if anybody would like to share. So firstly, what kinds of skills or qualifications did you put down for your researcher? Would anybody like to share their thoughts? Yes?
Talk about sensible and impartial, logical,
Ethical?
organized, and actualizado. Vai, Amanda, só para pegar. When you search for to know about the
So analytical? Yeah?
Atualizado, bonitinho aí como é.
So, yeah? So knowledgeable about... Yeah, okay, awesome. Would anybody else like to share? So this group over here, they talked about researchers being knowledgeable, so understanding the existing evidence, being up to date with what's going on, ethical, honest, good listener. Is there anything else that you would add to your researcher? We can move on. So let's then think. So we flip our sheets over again. What about our research participants? What kinds of skills or characteristics or qualifications does a research participant need to have? Oh, okay.
try to a lot of disabilities and put a doubt in the center because mostly the participant has a share because the family is always involved. There's sometimes
That's good. Yeah.
I think
We can work with that. That's good. Yeah. So this group over here, for their research participants, they've done some brilliant drawings. I think you win the art award for the day. They talked about their research participant having lived experience of disability, being willing to share those experiences. Some of the characteristics they shared was that maybe they have some doubt about their experiences or some doubt about the social world that they live in that they would like to share. Yeah, and they have some interest in the research, some investment. So that's really good for me because it helps with my narrative moving forward. So when I get people to do this task, I quite often hear very similar themes. So we have a very knowledgeable researcher who understands research, and we have a participant with lived experience who's really willing to share their lived experience with us, and that tends to be what we find in the many groups that I've done this activity with. Now, I'd like you to do one more thing with your pictures. So I want you to think about these questions. I want you to think about who decides what questions are researched and asked. I want you to think about who decides what methods are used and what data is collected. Who creates meaning from that data? So who does the interpretation of whatever is shared? Who decides who needs to know about those findings? And who decides how those findings are shared or disseminated? So I want you in your groups to think about those questions, and then on your pictures that you've drawn or your list of characteristics, to label each one with most power or least power. So who has the most power and who has the least power? Hopefully you've had some time to think about this. I don't want to stop the discussions. There's some really good conversations happening. Great. Okay, so we're going to do it by show of hands this time. So hopefully you've had a thought about this or labeled your images, but who put most power with the researcher? So just by show of hands, who thinks the researcher has the most power in this situation? They're not listening. Malu. Okay, so we've got a group of listeners over here, rest of the room. So who has the most power? If you think it's the researcher, raise your hand. Thank you. So most people in the room have put the power with the researcher. And again, we see this a lot. Very often in a researcher-researched or participant relationship, the power in that relationship sits with the researcher, the knowledgeable researcher who's a great listener, who knows the ways to do research, who's analytical and systematic and has great qualifications because they've been to university and they've got the credentials. They have the most power in this relationship compared to our participant who has the lived experience, who's willing to share that experience, who really wants to create some form of change in the lives that they live. Now, when we put this within the framing of epistemic injustice, I really like this quote from Miranda Fricker. She says, "If we want to achieve a full understanding of human practice, social phenomena, or pattern of relationships, then we must take up the point of view of those on the losing end." And I think that's a really powerful quote, because if we think about disabled people, quite often they are on the losing end. There is injustice in the lives that they live. They live in an ableist society where they're constantly having to fight for equity. They're at the losing end. And so from Fricker's perspective, they're who we need to start with. So we need to shift that power balance. We need to move that power from us as the qualified, very able, knowledgeable researchers to the lives of people who have lived experience, to understanding what it's like in that very complex web and maze of intersectionality of place and space and experience, to really understand disabled lives. And through that, we can then create change and we can create impact. So what does this mean for qualitative researchers who examine disability in PE and sport context? Well, for starters, We need to be talking to the right people. If we think about testimonial injustice and we're always just asking PE teachers what they think about inclusion, that doesn't tell us anything about inclusion. Inclusion, if we go from what Justin was talking about yesterday, is an intersubjective experience. It's a feeling, and a PE teacher isn't going to know how it feels to be included. Only the disabled young person knows how it feels to be included, and so we have to talk to the right people to understand that. We need to be asking the right kinds of questions. If we as researchers are always just following our own agenda, if we're like, I've got a question that I'm really interested in understanding and finding out some answers to, and we're leading with our agenda, then we're not necessarily addressing the real agendas that need to be addressed. So we need to be asking the right questions, and those questions should have some seating within the communities that we're trying to work with, where we're trying to create some form of change. And we need to move beyond conventional data collection approaches. Traditional data collection methods, as I said before, are created by non-disabled people to investigate non-disabled issues. And if we're just taking those data collection approaches and applying them to, research with disabled people, then we're not necessarily capturing what we need to be capturing. So we need to work with communities to understand how they best share their experiences. What is a meaningful way for them to be able to communicate their lived experience? And that's the starting point for us. And this leads me really nicely onto participatory methods. So Sebastian yesterday talked about a participatory project that he'd been undertaking, and that I felt was a really nice introduction for me today, because one of the questions yesterday was about, well, what methods do you use? And so that's what I'm going to talk about moving forward, is what is participatory research. Please do feel welcome to go back to your seats. You don't have to sit on the floor. Sorry, you're going to get cramp if you stay down there. Forgot. So participatory research is a bit of a passion of mine. I think it's a very, very valuable, very useful approach to doing research. And there are many, many reasons why I favor participatory research over other ways of doing research with disabled young people. So participatory research offers researchers a really powerful tool for engaging disabled people through a rights-based research that advocates for inclusion, participation, and empowerment. One of the key facets of participatory research is that it enables change through the research process. So it's not just about collecting data, it's about creating change through the research and working with communities in doing that. So it's not about us as researchers parachuting in, collecting our data, and leaving, but instead it's about working with communities to understand what their needs are, to understand what the issues are that they are experiencing, to understand how they want to share those experiences, how we can make meaning from those experiences, who needs to know about those experiences, and how we can therefore create change within the lives of disabled people. So the central premise of participatory research is that it's research with and by disabled people, not on them. So we're not just collecting data, we're working with communities. We're enabling them and giving agency to disabled communities to create change within their own lives through those research processes. Participatory research is underpinned by equity. It's about creating equitable research processes. So it's rebalancing that power. In the images that we drew and the conversations that we've had, We recognize that in traditional research, the power is held by the researcher. They are the credible knowledge producer within a research context. And participatory research completely shifts that and turns it on its head. And instead, it recognizes that disabled people have agency, disabled people have knowledge, and disabled people can create knowledge. They have the power to enact change within their social worlds, and we as researchers help to facilitate that. We work together within those communities. So in doing participatory research, what our intention is to collaborate with disabled people in all phases of the research process. It's worth me pointing out now that there are lots of different ways of doing participatory research. There are a whole range of different participatory research approaches. One of the really popular ones that we see a lot in the literature at the moment is co-production. So co-production is a form of participatory research, but disabled people may not be involved in all aspects of the research. They may be involved in certain parts of it to sort of drive different elements of the research process. When I talk about participatory research, I center this on participatory action research. Participatory action research is about working with disabled communities from the start to end product to enable that change within the community. And when I talk about communities, we're not thinking like, on a large scale quite often. Very often it's on a very, very small scale. So it may be within 1 or 2 schools where you're enacting change, or it could be on a bigger level. It could be on a massive policy level. But the intention there is that you're working with communities to identify issues, to understand those issues, and to create some form of change. So you can see here my image. This is an output from a very small-scale participatory project that I did in a special school with children with quite complex learning difficulties. I call it my winging it project. It was a lot of fun. I went into the school not really having any idea what we were going to do, and I just worked with the young people to create something. I went in school every week over a half term, so that's about a 6-week period. I worked with the school user group to understand what the issues might be. I worked with the young people. We did lots of different things. We did walking tours of the school. We spent a lot of time searching on the internet together because I thought that would be really useful. We took pictures of different spaces. We had conversations. We made posters. And at the end of the project, I was like, what do we do with all this? Where do we go next? And they were like, I think our parents need to know. They need to know what we've been doing. And so we wrote a letter to the parents. We highlighted what we'd done over the weeks that we'd worked together, what we found, and the letter ended with a list of all the sort of community disability sport opportunities that young people could access, because that was one of the big issues that they experienced. They had a lot of opportunity at school because it was a special school that was a sort of specialist sports college. But as soon as they stepped out of school grounds, there was nothing, and they didn't know where to look, and they didn't know how to find those opportunities. So we found those opportunities, we made it accessible, and we sent it out to parents. And this is what participatory research is about. It's identifying issues with the community, working with them to find solutions to those problems, and then sharing that with people who have the influence to help enable change. And for these young people, it was their parents. So we're going to move on to my final 2 activities for today, which is getting you to think about the different tools that you can use in participatory research and how that can enable the development of sort of creating meaningful research questions that you could potentially take forward in your own research. So we've got 2 key tasks that has a sort of final concluding task. We're going to take a look at problem trees and stakeholder rainbows, and then we're going to think about how we can use those tools to create meaningful research questions. We're using a hypothetical problem because we don't have time to work within communities right now, so you are the community. I need my helpers again, please. So for each, we'll do problem trees first, but there's 2 pages for each one.
And we give that to each group?
Yeah, 2 pages. I don't know how many copies there are, so. You may want to work in your groups as you did before. If you would be more comfortable working on a larger sheet of paper, then please do feel welcome to grab one and some pens, and you can work on the floor, you can work on your tables if you're more comfortable sitting this time. I'll explain the activity once the sheets have been handed out. Okay, so a problem tree is, and it can be any shape. It can be, a mind map. It can be a spidergram. It doesn't have to be a tree, but a tree is quite a useful piece of imagery for thinking about what we're doing in this activity. So a problem tree is about, number one, identifying a problem. I've given you the problem, which I'll show you on the next page. So your problem is that students with disabilities don't feel like they have opportunity to be active on campus. That's the problem that we've identified within our hypothetical community. Disabled students don't have opportunities to be active. On your problem tree, I want you to think about... So on your problem tree, I want you to think about that problem and recognize that all problems have their root causes and have some effect. So they impact people in some way, and there may be some causes, some root causes that drive that problem and have created that problem. So within your groups, I want you to think about our problem, that disabled students don't feel they have opportunity to be active on campus. I want you to see if you can think about or identify some potential causes to that problem, why we may have that problem in the first place. And then I want you to think about the impact of that problem. What effect does that have for disabled students or other community members on campus? And I'll give you sort of 5 or so minutes to do that.
So for core problems,
I'll give you another 2 minutes to have a think about your problem tree. So 2 more minutes.
You're so good at being away from your laptop and just presenting. This is something. This is my script. I need this. This is going to be the biggest challenge of doing the show.
Okay. I'm very conscious of time. I'm not very good with my timekeeping. So we'll pause that activity there. Now I want you to think about how much discussion you've just had in your groups. So you've imagined yourself to be part of this particular community. You've been discussing this particular problem. And just listening to all of that energy in the room discussing this particular problem, I want you to imagine that in a research context. So imagine doing that with community members and getting them to think through a problem that they are passionate about, a problem that they may want to fix, an issue that is ingrained in their own experience. I want you to think about the discussions that you could have with those community members to understand the impact of that particular problem on their lived experience, to think about how they conceptualize what is causing that problem for them, and to think about how you can then take that to create research that can enact change and have impact for those community members. So in terms of how we can use activities like a problem tree in research practice, is that you can use them to support understanding the key issues that disabled people, that disabled students or pupils or young people may be experiencing. And it doesn't have to be a problem tree. It can be any shape, any form. But the purpose of activities like this are to get people talking about something that they are passionate about. I'm sure that if you reflect on the challenges that you may have faced in research that you may have done, particularly with children and young people, is that sometimes it's really hard to engage our participants. We may be asking all the questions and not really getting very much in terms of our responses. It may be that, your participants don't seem particularly invested in engaging in the research, whatever it might be. But if you center your research on a problem that really matters to the individuals that you are working with, you get discussion, you get engagement, and you get passion. And this is what activities like this are intended to do, is to really engage with communities to understand what they are passionate about and what we as researchers can do to support them to create change. Another activity that we can do is a stakeholder rainbow. So quite often, issues are very, very complex. I'm sure that when you were talking about the root causes of this particular problem that we face, that disabled students on campus don't have opportunity to be physically active, You didn't just talk about disabled students. You may have talked about other people on campus. You may have talked about real key structural issues around policy. You may have talked about wider impact beyond disabled students. Maybe there are other students on campus who may be facing similar problems or experiencing similar things. There are other people in this complex web of social phenomena that have some part to play. And some of those people have a lot of influence, and some of them have very little. And some of those people are very, very much impacted by the problem, and some of them aren't. And it's important to understand that web of stakeholders in relation to any particular issue if you want to create some change, because you've got to be working with the right people. You've got to ask the right questions to the right people to start with, but then if you want to do something with those findings afterwards, you've got to identify the right people who can create that change that you want to see. So my next activity, Malou, do we have time for another activity, do you think? Yes, Malou says yes. So my next activity is for you to think about that same problem. So the problem that you've been thinking about in relation to your problem tree, those effects, those causes. And now I want you to move on to think about who the stakeholders are that play a part in this particular issue. So my helpful helpers, we have another handout. So I'll give you a sort of copy of a stakeholder rainbow. I want you to think about who those stakeholders might be. And then on your stakeholder rainbow, I'd like you to map them in terms of those stakeholders who are most affected and least affected by the issue, and those stakeholders who have most influence and those who have least influence in creating change. Okay. Hopefully, I know, I'm always ignored, Malou. So hopefully you've had some time to think about those key stakeholders. Who's most affected? It's likely that where you sort of placed disabled students is in the most effective section or slice of your stakeholder rainbow. And in the most influential, it was likely to be, university administrators, university senior leaders, because they are the ones who have the power to create that change, to be able to resource new opportunities, to create new facilities, to buy the right kinds of equipment, and so on. Now, stakeholder rainbows, I think, are very, very useful. They can be used at the start of a research program, and you can work with your communities in doing this to be able to understand who the right kinds of stakeholders are or who you should be thinking about within the research. But stakeholders are really, really useful because they help us to map who the key stakeholders are. So if we think about what Fricka says about, starting with the most vulnerable, those who are most affected by the issues, and working with them to understand that problem. We then need some kind of direction from there. We can't solve the problem through that alone. We have to work with people who have influence. So in the project that I spoke about before, for the young people that I worked with, they felt that their parents had the most influence. The problem for them was that they didn't have or didn't know about opportunities outside of school to be active. They were not active outside of school. And for them, being young people, their parents were the most influential person that could help them change that. So we did the work, we identified the opportunities, and then the change comes from the parents who then enact that, who take the children to those opportunities and allow them to be active outside of school. It works very differently in different programs and different projects. Lesley's PhD research, she worked with young people around inclusive school sports events. And for those young people, the most influential people for them were the people that put on these events. So through an organization called the Youth Sport Trust, it was their PE teachers. And those were the key stakeholders who have the most influence. And so they were invited to learn from the research that she had done, and that led to real change. So in one school, one of the groups of young people said that there were lots of opportunities for extracurricular sport for their non-disabled peers, but there was nothing for them. And their PE teacher who attended that event, that showcase event, was like, we need to do something about this. We need to create these opportunities for young people. So again, we can see that change enacted on a small level, but really meaningful change. And the way that we do that is we work with those who are most affected to understand the issue, and then we target those with most influence to create the change. So together, these kinds of activities are really, really useful in research practice because they help us to frame meaningful research questions. They help us to get direction in the research so that we know we're tackling the right kinds of problems with the right kinds of people. And so the final thing that I wanted you to do today, before I close, is to think about both your problem tree and your stakeholder rainbow and identify a research question. So identify a piece of research that might be taken forward through the kinds of discussions around this particular problem that we've talked about today. And when thinking about your research question, I want you to identify the phenomenon. So what's the core issue or problem that we're trying to address? The population. So who is it that you need to work with to understand that phenomena in more detail? What you want to know from them is it that you want to understand experiences, gain perceptions, find out about, the financial capability of an institution to be able to enact change, whatever it might be. What do you want to know from this particular population? And the context, because in qualitative research, context is very, very important. Place, space, context frames experience, and so we have to center context when we're thinking about research questions. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to see if you can design a research question based on the work that you've done today. And then I will close my session so that Lesley has enough time to follow on with hers. I'll let you think about your research questions maybe during the break. So this is, I think, my nearly final slide. So we've got to the point where we have a research question, we understand what problem we need to maybe try and address. Then comes the challenging part of finding the right methods to do that. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the session today that quite often qualitative researchers will gravitate towards interviews and focus groups. They're like, the gold standard qualitative research methods. Sometimes they don't work, and sometimes they're not effective, and sometimes the young people that we're trying to talk to just don't want to talk back. They want to do something different because they are children, and children don't work like adults. They don't necessarily want to sit and have an hour-long conversation in great detail about things that they might find a bit distressing and a bit upsetting. And so we have to think creatively. We have to work with our communities to find ways that allow them to share their experience in a way that is meaningful to them. And so we need to think about what methods suit the needs of our participants. If we're working with a group of disabled students who have communication difficulties, doing an interview is going to be incredibly challenging for them, and that would be really unfair and, in my view, quite unethical to expect them to sit and have a conversation for an hour. So that method, it doesn't suit their particular needs. We need to think of something different. We also have to think about what methods engage our participants most. We want research to be enjoyable. It's not like a business meeting. We want our participants to feel like they're getting something from sharing their views with us. We're trying to create equity in that research process. It's not just about us taking all the time. We want them to get something from it. We want to make it enjoyable and engaging. We want them to feel able to share their experiences with us. So what tools can we use that really engage the communities that we're working with? I'll draw on Lesley's PhD again. She recognized that young people love digital technology. They're always on their phones. They're always on social media. And so she used vlogging as her main form of data collection in her PhD, because she identified that actually a focus group or an interview just wasn't going to be suitable for the young people that she was working with and wasn't going to engage them. And then we also have to think about what methods allow our communities to really meaningfully engage in the research process. If we think about indigenous methods, if we think about different cultures and communities, if we draw on what Fabian was talking about yesterday, sometimes the methods that we use have been designed in cultures where those methods fit, but they're not necessarily translated very well into other cultures and communities and other ways of being. And so we have to think creatively. And that is the beauty of qualitative research, is that it gives us the flexibility to be creative. We don't have to do interviews and focus groups just because some textbooks say that that's how qualitative researchers do research. If we think about what qualitative research is, it's analyzing and interpreting, contextual non-numerical data. And non-numerical data is basically everything outside of statistics. It can be pictures, it can be observation, it can be walking tours, it can be stories, it can be songs, it can be anything, but it has to be meaningful to your participants. So I'm going to end this by encouraging you to think creatively, and through that to think about how some of the stuff that we've talked about today might address some of those challenges that you potentially have faced in your own research, be they ethical, methodological, engagement related. How can we use qualitative research in such a way that it really engages and creates meaning within the communities that we are working within? And now you can clap, because now I'm finished. Yes, you can ask questions. Well, because Lesley's work is very, very related to what I've just talked about. So, no, we're going to have group questions at the end, if that's okay. I'm mindful people might need to have a break, get a coffee, relax a little bit. So we'll hold questions to the end.
My God. Então, voltando aí na nossa programação, agora a gente tem a palestra da professora Lesley Sharpe, com a temática Representation and Accessible Dissemination and Disability Research. E eu queria falar que a palestra da professora é bem conectada com o que a Janine trouxe, também tem a questão da prática, então vai ser bem legal agora. Thank you, Lesley.
Thank you. Thank you. I love you too, Malou. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Malou, for bringing me over. I'm a last-minute addition, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. You guys have been so warm to us as a group, and I'm having a great time. So again, please count this as my interview, so I can stay here. So. It's really nice to meet you. As Malou said, my name's Lesley, and I'm a lecturer of sociology of sport at the University of Lincoln. Like Janine, it's right in the middle of the country in the UK. It's a pretty cool city. It's quite medieval. It has lots of mythology around it. There's this guy, this imp, that apparently goes into the city to cause trouble. I bought one for Malou because I thought that represented her quite well. It's a gorgeous city. It has a medieval cathedral and a castle. If you ever get the opportunity to visit, I do recommend it. So for me, my research interests are in those intersectional experiences of marginalized young people in PE and school sport. And like Janine, I use participatory and creative research methods to engage them in research. I'm really interested in what I'm going to talk about today. So that's that knowledge translation, how we disseminate research and how we can make this a bit more accessible through visual and creative outputs. And through my work, I never planned this, but I've become a self-taught illustrator. So all of the illustrations that I show you today, they're mine, and I've created them through my research. So the presentation today is foregrounded by 3 key points. And the first is that disabled young people's experiences have historically been excluded from research regarding their experiences. So again, what Janine kind of started with today, they've been omitted. Yet there has been a shift to more participatory co-production methods, more creative, qualitative research methods as methods to engage them in research. And that's absolutely great. I think it's a really positive shift. But yet we are still largely disseminating research about our communities, our stakeholders, the people that we research with in traditional ways. And I think that this is creating some informational barriers. Oh no, I've gone too far. There we go. So I'm going to start off today by asking you to play a game with me. The game is Spot the Barrier. And if I could have my glamorous head assistant to come and give you some resources. So what I would like you to do is just to have a look at these traditional methods of disseminating research. And if you could, I would like you to identify what might be the problem with them. What barriers are they creating for our stakeholders and the communities that we research with? Okay? Good. I'll give you 5 minutes when Anthony is finished. Come on, Anthony, hurry up. Okay, I'll give you 1 more minute, and then we'll come back. Yeah, one. You good? 1 minute. Now? We go now? Yeah, okay. Is everybody ready to see how we can win the game? Okay, so for the first example that you had, did anybody come up with a barrier? Did you spot a barrier for a traditional journal paper? What was the main barrier? Expensive, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, so again, yeah, so teachers, coaches won't have access. And again, that comes with a certain amount of knowledge of being able to, judge whether research is good quality research, if it's rigorous, if it's something that could inform your practice. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant, thank you. What about for the research report? Any barriers for that? Yeah, you put that beautifully. I couldn't have said it better myself. Absolutely. Why do we need this information? How is it going to help a coach or a teacher? I didn't understand it either. Yeah, perfect. What about the last one then? So those kind of, do you guys have Canva here? Canva, the application to create infographics? So those editable generic images, any problems with those that you could spot? The graphics. Yeah, accessibility issues. I think for me, my main problem with it is when you use these generic images. Yeah, they're great that you can edit them. They're quick to use. You can whip up an infographic in no time. But the people who design these want you to read disability instantly. So they always boil it down to one person with one assistive device. They're flat on the screen, and it's always this kind of generic image. It's usually a physical disability. And that just does not reflect that kind of diverse lived experiences that our participants have. So congratulations. Thank you for playing my game. I think that really helps to foreground the presentation. So there is this problem. My argument is that disseminating through these traditional methods may actually serve to exclude our co-researchers, our participants from accessing the research that they help to create, the research that is about them. They have no access to it. And as you quite rightly put, this is because of traditional dissemination creates informational barriers through paywalls, scientific jargon, through the format, the language, access knowledge. And this really serves to exclude those non-academic stakeholders, particularly young people, but also, coaches in communities, teachers, like you quite rightly identified. However, I think the real problem is that these traditional outputs are the ones that are most highly valued by our higher educational institutions. They want journal papers, they want research reports for funders, for the people who fund research. So actually the argument that I put forward then is that institutional structures actually reward this informational exclusion. So we have to do more as researchers to make sure our research is getting to the right places. Quite a profound thought for me. So kind of my thought is then, if research about inclusion is not self-accessible, then it fails to embody those very values that it seeks to promote. We have a problem. Oh my God. Do you need me to move? do you want me to do it? Okay. Thanks. So as a group, I think that we've been making some progress, some steady progress in kind of going in the right direction. So as Janine mentioned, through my PhD, I worked with young disabled people to create vlogs about their experiences at school, school sport competitions, these inclusive events, rather than talking to them about them. Young people love YouTube. They're interested in vlogging. They're already doing it. So why can't we harness their own medium and use that as a mechanism for research? So they went off into the competitions and filmed their experiences, and then in place of kind of follow-up focus groups about the data that they created, we did movie editing workshops instead. So we took that raw kind of footage and I worked with them to create movies where they invited stakeholders into their schools, into their settings. The young people planned the events and they invited those stakeholders to come, sit and watch their videos as a way for them to kind of vicariously experience their events through the kind of lenses of young people. We've also been looking at things like including infographics within journal papers. So some journals are kind of moving in this direction. So they have opportunities for more creative output. So kind of just shifting the dial slightly in that direction. Things like this is some work I did with Anthony a while ago now. So kind of how can we produce young people's reports? The research report that you had in your Spot the Barrier game. Can we compose a young people's version of that that's more accessible and that represents them within that research? Things like Janine presented earlier, things like social stories, capturing young people's experience. Can we illustrate that? How can we represent them in the findings that we take to funders? I think this went to the Department of Education through the Youth Sport Trust, and they really liked that they were able to visualize that kind of journey. Yes, it's not for all people, but they were able to go, okay, it looks a little bit like that. And then I have some comic books here. So myself and Janine had another project where I worked with young people and kind of said, what should we do with this research? How should we represent you in it? What can we create that resonates best? And they said that they would like to do a comic book. So I was able to illustrate those young people who were taking part in inclusive hockey clubs. The comic book is informed by the research. You're welcome to take a copy, have a look. But it was a way of kind of representing them through that research process and what we put out. So my argument then is that illustration and data visualization, they're not just creative choices. I argue that they're inclusive research methods, and we should be moving in this direction to make sure that, like Janine said earlier, that we're giving something back to our communities. We're creating something with them. We're not just simply, taking what we need, going and hiding it away in a journal that they cannot access. And I advocate for illustration and creative research methods because they resonate more with young people. They respect the diverse ways that people might engage with information, and they also allow really valuable opportunities for co-creation and co-design just beyond that representation as well. So they give an opportunity to invite people with lived experience to come and be part of that process and how we put the research out. So I'm going to hand back over to you. I have an activity that my glamorous assistant will deliver to you. Look at him go. And what I would like you to do, you don't have to draw if you don't feel comfortable to draw, but I would like you to have a go at designing a comic book style panel that communicates just one idea in a way that is accessible, visually representative of your participants, and try and make it engaging. This is where I'm struggling. But if you could please include in your comic panel a key message, a character or a scene that represents your audience, and then maybe, if you can, a way of directing stakeholders to any further information. So maybe would you put a QR code on it, for example? But it's over to you to do a bit of drawing. Like I said, don't feel obliged. You can design it if you want, but be as creative as you can be. It's not a competition. And I would give you like maybe 5-8 minutes to do this. I'm never going to get back, am I? Okay. I think I've been walking around and what you're creating is amazing. Thank you if you didn't feel confident to draw for having a go, and hopefully you found it a useful activity. It's not always easy to kind of reduce it down to that key message and what's the kind of, how can I convey the message that I want to my stakeholders, but I saw some brilliant examples around the room, so thank you. You can relax now. You can just, I'm going to tell you what I did. But for now, thank you. And I'll go through our project. So I'm going to present a case study. And it's a project that myself and Janine did last year. I think we finished it. And we worked with a colleague from Loughborough University, from the Peter Harrison Center. Her name's Professor Vicky Tolfrey. And we got some... We called the project Wheelchair Basketball Stories, and we got a small grant from FIBA, so a basketball association and NGB in Europe, and they have these Basketball for Good projects. And what we wanted to do was kind of do something a little bit different with our collective findings. So it isn't new research; it's just based on our previous research, and we disseminated in traditional ways. So we thought, what could we do differently with this? So we kind of took some of Vicky's work, some of Janine's work, and some of my work, and we identified that through the thread through the work was that there was these three critical aspects of young disabled people's wheelchair basketball journeys, and we called these discovery, benefits, and participation. So the aim of our project was that we wanted to create something that accurately represented disabled young people's journeys in wheelchair basketball. We wanted it to be interactive. We wanted to do more than just show people something. We wanted to signpost them beyond the resource. And we really tried with this one. We wanted to create something that was engaging, and we challenged ourselves to create something that young people themselves might want to share. So with that first point, so to accurately represent disabled young people's journeys, we said that representation really matters, going back to that infographic. And this is especially important in representations of disability, because we know historically that not all visuals concerning disability are good visuals. And those generic images are often, they reproduce negative tropes and negative stereotypes about disability. Remember, one person, one assistive device, always flat, never out in a community, never really representing a true representation of lived experience. But with this, as researchers, we must collaborate with people who have that lived experience to create those visuals so that they resonate with their experiences and that they resist perpetuating, putting forward those damaging stereotypes. So our approach then was that I drafted 3 illustrations based on our research, because I didn't want to go with an empty page. You saw how hard it is to get going. So I thought I would take some material, present those to our friends and colleagues at the Peter Harrison Center who have lived experience of both disability and play wheelchair basketball. And we invited them to come and have some coffee with us and have a look at what I created and help to shape, to make sure that the resources that we were creating together would be representative of their experiences. So it was this collaborative process of finalizing the designs that we came up with. So we came up with these. So discovery as the first one, benefits of taking part in wheelchair basketball, and then the final one was participation. And these look very different to my first drafted resources because, for example, in the discovery resource, based on our research, I drew a school because people find wheelchair basketball from school. So I drew an actual building. And then with people who come through hospitals, I drew a hospital. And then the final one is that I drew a community center, or I drew a basketball court. And when we presented these to our friends and colleagues, they said, no, Lesley, that's not right. They said, it's not the space, it's the people within those spaces who have supported our journeys and connected us with wheelchair basketball. So I rubbed out my buildings that took me ages to draw. And I draw some people that were more representative of those journeys. So people like teachers, parents, and friends, people like physiotherapists, and then people in the community that help connect those young people with wheelchair basketball. Then in the second one, again, based on our previous research, I drew the coach as able-bodied. And what our colleagues said was like, actually, there's a really good opportunity here to challenge some of those stereotypes around disability sport. And why not draw the coach as also using a power chair, somebody who's disabled themselves? Let's challenge that kind of stereotype about disability sport in this way. And I said, awesome. Again, I rubbed him out. We drew a new coach. And then in the third one, so participation, I just drew a basketball court, a really generic basketball court. But what we're advocating for within the project is that schools and coaches take up the 3x3 game, which has become more popular recently. And they said, well, if you want it to be the 3x3 game of wheelchair basketball, it has to look like it. And it's always played on a grey court in these tones, and the ball's always yellow and purple. I didn't know this. This wasn't evident from our research. But through that process, we were able to create a better representation of their experiences. So we wanted to signpost beyond the resource. Like, yeah, they're good to look at, but what do they actually do? So again, our approach was to, for each resource, discovery, participation, we made sure that each resource was embedded with a QR code that takes users to a Linktree page. So do you guys have Linktree? I created one for the project, and then the QR code would take you to the Linktree page that corresponds with each of the resource. With Linktree, it captures some simple metrics, so you are able to demonstrate impact. You can see who's coming to your page and where they're going and what they're clicking on, so that is great if you have to demonstrate things like impact, but it works like this. So this is just a shot of a recording of my phone screen. So you scan the QR code. This is the discovery resource. You can kind of scroll through, and there's different resources that can signpost you on. So if you're interested, you can download the resource itself. You can download that to your phone, your iPad, put it on the wall, whatever you want to do. But then if you're interested in taking part in wheelchair basketball, we linked a how to play page. And then we also linked to resources of a club finder. So you could put your location in and see where your closest club was. Okay, so the third point, this was the hardest one, I think, for us. How can we make something that's actually engaging, that young people would want to share? Would they like it? And what we've done really is we created that dedicated Instagram page. Young people, they're on Instagram. It's really easy to share resources through. Again, we're kind of learning with this. We created it, and I'm not going to lie and say it's like super successful. We definitely didn't go viral, but people have come to the page and shared some of the resources, and I've connected with people through that. The Wheelchair Basketball Stories project, it's attracted some attention in local and national news, which is great for the project. We're still trying to discover ways to generate that wider impact, to make those connections, but we've definitely learned some lessons, and we're making some progress in what we're doing. We're just trying to slowly shift the dial in that way. So just to, I guess, wrap up then, if you're interested, you can scan the QR code, have a look at the Linktree. If anybody wants to talk to me about how I put it together, I'm more than happy to talk about that. But I think by highlighting this as a case study, I think the project shows how creative, accessible, and collaborative approaches can challenge those issues with traditional dissemination of research. I'm laughing because I recognize that Justin's going to come up after me and talk to you about how to publish an APAC. So I'm not really doing the best setup, I'm sorry. But projects like this, it offers a novel concept for researchers who want to make their findings more representative of the disabled people that they research with in ways that are inclusive, resonant, and socially relevant. That's it from me. I think me and Janine are taking questions now, but thank you so much. Thanks for listening. My biggest fan. Oh, okay. And Anthony too. Doesn't Anthony take the questions?
Pessoal, perguntas. A May tinha uma pergunta.
First of all, congratulations to both of you. I have a few questions for you. First, I would like to understand the main differences between the collaborative and participant research to the participatory research, and to know what are the main authors in this theory. And for both of you, also I'd like to understand you can join on this too, but how are you dealing with the reliability and increasing trustworthy in qualitative research?
I'll have a go first. In terms of the main authors, I mean, participatory research isn't unique to our field. It's been used very, very widely in a whole range of different fields. So to pinpoint like a key person to go to learn about participatory research is really difficult. If you're interested in learning about participatory research within the field of sort of adapted physical education or inclusive physical education, a lot of what I learned came from Hayley Fitzgerald, who works with Anthony at Leeds Beckett University. Lesley and I have written some stuff. We have a chapter in the book that's coming out in January, just to plug that again. Lesley, who else? Help me here. Yeah, like authors.
I think they're good
places to start. Yeah. Hayley's work is really accessible to us.
The difference between participatory research and then co-production.
Participant and participatory research, because in Brazil we do make a lot of research using collaborative techniques and participation research.
Mm-hmm.
Participative, perhaps. So I would like to understand if we are talking about the same theories, or if we are dealing with a new approach of research. Not new for me, in my program at least, my graduate program.
I think with participatory approaches, it's a really wide spectrum of approaches. There's not like one go-to way of doing research that makes it participatory. If you are collaborating with community members and working with them to understand the key issues that are affecting them and working with them through the research process, then that makes it participatory. There are some distinctions between different kinds of participatory research. So there's, one framing called the mosaic approach, which is about working with different stakeholders in settings using a range of different methods to understand that particular context. And that's one particular approach to doing participatory research. There's participatory action research, which is more aligned to the kind of stuff that I was talking about today. There's co-production, which is where you may involve community members at certain parts of the research process. So ordinarily you'll see it, more towards the end of a research project where you have some findings and you're discussing the interpretation and what you do with those findings and creating something as a result of those findings, but where some of the more preliminary stages of the research are much more researcher-led. So there's lots of different ways of doing participatory research. If you're collaborating with community members and you're engaging community members and giving them the opportunity to have agency and to participate in a meaningful way within that research project, then I would say it comes under the banner of a participatory research project.
Thank you, Janine.
Any other questions? Don't give him the microphone.
About the project, the last one of
Yeah.
the wheelchair BB stores.
Yep.
Do you have some numbers to about how increase the search for clubs, and if you have any type of I forgot the word. Yeah, about results
Yeah.
about the increasing the
Yeah.
search of the sport.
Yeah, so through the link tree, it captures simple metrics, right? So I can see through that app how many people have come to the page, how many landed on it, what they clicked, and where they went afterwards. So when we've released them on Instagram and promoted them, obviously I've seen people coming. They're not great numbers. I think so far there's probably been about maybe 500 people come to the page, click something, download it, or go other places. With Linktree, again, it's paywalled, so I can capture simple metrics. But I think if you subscribe to a higher tier, that you can get more advanced metrics. So that's a way to evidence the impact through this platform. Yeah.
Congrats, girls. Lesley, I think my question is for you. It's not a question; it's a comment.
Okay.
It's good to hear. It's good to see your job is awesome.
Thank you.
And I remember a student some years ago. We write some paper about comic books in adaptive physical education. It's similar of you doing here. And I already texted him and give more job for him for made more designs. And I wish to know if you draw all the designs or use some app, some artificial intelligence, something like that.
Yeah, so I draw them on the iPad, so it's all digital. My process is obviously it's a collaborative process where I tend to work with young people, my participants. So like for the vlogging work for the flyers comic book. Obviously, it's complex with research ethics and confidentiality and protecting the identities of our participants. But the comic book are the young people that I worked with, and I said I can't draw you exactly because I have to protect you. But if you want pink hair, if you want a super cool wheelchair, show me which one you want, and I can represent you through that way. But I can protect you as well, so they'll see themselves within the work. They know who they are, and so yeah, that's kind of the process. But I do it in a couple of different ways where I'll use a reference image from like research, and we've taken photos and used it in that way, or just kind of watching YouTube and watching like people play in disability sport and use reference images there. So I'm making sure that kind of the wheelchairs that I draw and those things are all accurate. They're representative of real life. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I feel like there's some context here that maybe needs to be discussed a little bit. So part of the reason, and I'm speaking for Lesley here, but it's fine. Part of the reason why during her PhD we opted for, part of the reason why Lesley was like, I'm going to learn how to draw, was because there were quite important ethical considerations that we were faced with in trying to get the project off the ground and in trying to figure out what we did with the vlogs. So our ethics committee were quite firm in that we couldn't allow the young people to have the vlogs afterwards, and we couldn't show those vlogs through our dissemination because they showed the identities of the young people that Lesley was working with, and that created a lot of tensions and a lot of difficulties in how to navigate some complex ethical concerns and issues, but to still be able to represent the young people in a way that was meaningful to them, and that allowed us to show that agency in the process that they'd undertaken in working with Lesley to create these vlogs.
Yep.
And so Lesley taught herself to draw so that she could still represent the young people in the vlogs, but in a way that wasn't sharing their identity. So there was a real reason behind the drawing. It wasn't that she came into the PhD, she was like, I'm a great drawer and I'm going to draw. It was that there were some significant challenges, and Lesley overcame them by teaching herself to draw so that she could still represent the young people in a way that was meaningful to them.
It's its own debate, though, isn't it? The tension between ethics committee and doing participatory research. Often they want to know everything about the research, but Janine has just told you that you can go into settings and the problem should be generated by your communities, but ethics reviewers want to see the details of the research, and often we don't have them. So yeah, it speaks to probably a bigger tension. We're done?
Super,
Lunch,
thank
lunch.
you. Pessoal, agora a gente tem a pausa para o almoço, a gente retorna às 2h, tá bom? Com a palestra do Justin. E tem um QR Code lá fora que é a presença para conseguir o certificado, tá bom? Beijo, beijo.